Hello, hello, hello. This is Chris Ferdinandi from GoMakeThings.com. And today we're going to be talking about when you should use React or some other state-based UI tool. And we're actually going to be looking at a couple of different examples of how you might approach something with vanilla and when and why it might make more sense to use a state-based UI tool for that thing. We're going to be looking at two examples today. We're going to be looking at an e-commerce platform, and we're also going to be looking at the good old to-do list, because both provide different use cases for when state-based UI makes sense or when a tool like React makes sense. And we can whip up a demo pretty quickly with them. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to see more videos like this, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Suggestions for videos can go down in the comments. But I also wanted to mention that this video and others like it are made possible thanks to the generous support of my Go Make Things members. A recurring membership helps me create more videos like this and also gets you some cool perks, including access to my private Discord community, access to a giant collection of guides and resources, and my personal developer toolkit that I use to build websites. So with that out of the way, let's dig in. So the first example we are going to look at is a checkout cart or e-commerce platform. And so this is one of the first use cases where state-based UI really makes sense. If you have multiple disconnected pieces of HTML, they get updated when one piece of the data changes. So for example, I have a link that points to a checkout cart, and it displays the number of items that are in my cart. Somewhere else on the page, I also have some actual items you can add. And for each of those items, I have a form with a button you can use to add the item to the cart, as well as the specific product ID. And when it gets added to the cart, we want to add it to some sort of cart object and also keep track of the quantity of that item that we have in the cart. If we have at least one of those items in the cart, we're going to display a message that says you already have this item in your cart, just so the user knows, but maybe not when they don't. So if they have no items in their cart, we don't want to show this. So let's take a look at what that looks like in vanilla JavaScript first. So I have my cart object. And I guess actually if we were to jump up just a little bit, let's talk about the HTML first. So I have where the number of items in the cart is going to be. I have an empty span with an ID, where that call out, if they have the item in their cart already, is going to be. I have another empty div. This one has a data in cart attribute with the ID of that item, so we can find it. And otherwise the form is exactly the same. We've got our cart object that's going to hold that data. And I've used the query selector method to get a couple of elements from the page, the form, the cart, number of items in cart display, and the call out section. And I'm also grabbing the ID of the cart item. So once I get that call out section, I'm grabbing the data in cart attribute. That is the ID of the cart item that we want to keep track of. So if we scroll down to the bottom, I am listening for submit events on my form. And when that happens, I'm going to run the handle submit method to actually process it. Inside the handle submit method, I'm going to stop the form from reloading the page. I'm going to get my form data, grab the product ID, and then I'm going to update our cart object. So I'm going to set the a key in that object with the product ID. If it's already there, we're going to get its current value and add 1 to it. If not, we'll set it to 1 as our starting point. And then I have a couple of functions to update the cart count in the checkout link and show that call out. I also run both of those functions when the page loads to display some sort of initial UI. Let's take a look at the two update functions. So in update cart count, I am setting the number of items in the cart at 0. Then I'm getting an array of entries from my object and looping through them. And for each one, I am updating the length of of the cart by its value. So if there's one item, it's 1. If there's 2 items, it's 2, and so on. And then I'm setting that that cart element's text content to the number of items. And I'm also doing a little conditional here. So if there's only one item, we'll just say item. If there's more than one or no items, we'll put the S on the end. And same thing for the callout. I'm checking to see if the if that specific callout ID is inside the cart object using the object has own method. If it's not, we do nothing. If it is, we're going to render the callout message on the page. And if we jump over to the browser for a sec, you can actually see this in action. So as I click add to cart, this shows up, that shows up, already have items in there. Now, you can imagine as you add more and more complexity to this page, there's a lot of different places you're going to need to update things. And this is where a tool like state-based UI can really come in handy. So I'm going to start with Preact instead of React. I have an article on my site that I'll make sure I link to on how this all works. But what I like about Preact for this sort of thing is that there is a fully standalone version that you can use in the browser without having to use JSX, without having to run it through any sort of processor like Babel or anything like that. So it makes it really, really, really nice for teaching. And I also just generally like Preact better. So the HTML is the same, but let's talk about how the JavaScript has changed. So the first thing we're doing is we're still using an object for the cart, but we're passing it into Preact's signal method. And the way this signal works is it has getter and setter functions under the hood. So whenever I update the value of this object, the UI will automatically re-render, which means I don't need to explicitly do it. We are going to create 2 components. One is the cart, and I'm doing the same thing here. I'm getting the length. The only difference is instead of setting the inner HTML or the inner, I guess the text content rather, like I was in the vanilla version, I am using the standalone version of Preact's HTML method, which converts this, uses tag template literals to convert this into an object under the hood that Preact then uses to do its DOM diffing. It's similar to what would happen if you were to run JSX, but it works entirely with vanilla JavaScript and template literals, which I like. And then similar thing with the callout component, except for this one, we are passing in that unique identifier as a property of the component rather than having it saved to a global variable somewhere. But I'm doing the exact same thing here. If the item is already in the cart, or if the item's not in the cart, we show nothing. Otherwise, we are going to display our callout. And you'll notice in both of these, because they are components, I'm returning my HTML string. I am not actually doing the rendering because that happens in Preact's render method. So if we scroll down just a little bit, you can see where I was doing my initial kind of rendering before. I am instead passing the cart and callout components into the render function, and I am also passing in the specific elements they should be rendered into respectively. So the cart display up in the UI and the callout element. We've got this callout UID still in here. I am still grabbing it, but I'm adding it as a property on the component. I don't technically have to do this, but it's a lot more in line with what you'll typically see with how state-based UI components are typically built. So I thought I would do it this way just to be consistent with norms within this development style. I'm again listening for submit events on the form. And inside my handle submit method, I am grabbing the form data. And then this is where things deviate. So in the original, the vanilla version, I am updating my cart data, and then I'm explicitly running methods to update the cart count and show the callout. I have to do that in multiple places. But with state-based UI, I am cloning my signal object. You don't have to do this with primitive. So if I had like a string or a number or a Boolean, I wouldn't have to do this. But because I am working with an object, this is true for arrays as well, I am creating a clone. I am manipulating the clone, and then I'm updating the value of my cart to this cloned object. And that has to do with the fact that when you reference an array, you're not creating a copy of it, you're referencing the original, and so you can run into some kind of weird edge cases if you don't make the copy first. But you can see the trick here is I just update the value and then the UI changes. So let's jump over and take a look at the pre-act version. So same setup, and then every time I hit the cart, the quantity goes up, and we can just reload the page here. You can see also the callout shows up when I do that. So that's the first situation where state-based UI really makes sense, or can make sense. I generally don't have that big of an issue with the vanilla version. I tend to favor that one. Even in situations like this, where I think state-based UI really shines is when you have lots of pieces of UI inside a single component that change when data changes. And for that, I think a to-do list provides a really nice example. So imagine you have a to-dos object that has an array of to-do items. And for any one item, you're going to have a label, the actual to-do item, whether or not it's been completed, its due date, whether it's important or not, as well as some sort of unique identifier for that to-do item. And then in your UI, you have a variety of different ways that UI can look based on that state. So you have a button to either complete the to-do, or if it's already been completed, it might show as a checked off thing instead of an open box for you to check. You're going to have the item itself. That button, by the way, will have an ARIA pressed state of true or false, depending on the state of the button. So is the item already completed or not? If it's completed, you might also want to have a line through the actual item itself, which you could do with the delete element. And then you might have different icons. So if it has a due date, you might want to display an icon and have that due date. If it's important, you might want to have an icon and display that. And you can imagine a world where users can change these things and then the UI has to update accordingly. So let's take a look at the vanilla version of that first. So in this version, I've got my array to hold my to-dos. And just looking at the HTML for a sec, you can see this one also has a form to add new to-do items. I've got fields for the to-do, a due date, a checkbox for whether or not it's important, and then an empty element to actually render all of those to-dos into. That's the other caveat here, right? It's not always going to be a list. If you have no to-do items, you might want to show a message there instead. So we've got our empty array that will eventually hold the to-do data. And I'm also grabbing the form and the element that the to-dos are going to get rendered into. And then I've got a function to generate HTML for a new to-do item. For the to-do, I'm going to grab the label, the due date, whether or not it's important, whether or not it's completed, and the UID. And I'm going to spit out a list item that has different things based on different conditions, right? So if it's completed, ARIA pressed is true. If not, it's false. We've got two different icons we're going to use based on whether it's completed or not. The label, if there's a due date, we are going to show the date. If not, we're not. And I can actually see I did a copy paste error. So let's get rid of HTML off here, because those should just be strings. So we'll do that, and we will do the same thing here. Okay. And same thing with important. And then I've got a function to render the entire to-do list. So if there's no to-dos, we're going to set the inner HTML on that to-do element to you don't have any to-dos yet. Otherwise, we will create an unordered list and then loop through each item and generate a new to-do list item from that item. Here I'm using the array map method, which is going to loop over it and return my HTML string for each one. And then we can use the array join method to combine them all together into a single string, which the inner HTML method, or property rather, then injects into the UI. I've also got a function to add to-dos to my UI. So it accepts this will happen whenever the form gets submitted. So I'll take the to-do data, and here's where things start to get really clunky. So if there's an existing list, we're going to get it. We'll use the query selector method to look for that unordered list. If one doesn't exist, we want to create it with the document create element method, add an ID, wipe out any existing HTML from the to-do element so that that message, right? You don't have any to-do items yet. We want to wipe that out. And then we'll append our list element into that container. And then we can create our individual item. So we will create a new list element. And then we are going to generate the new to-do HTML for it. Where did I go? Down here. Yeah, although I'm now realizing another little hiccup here, right, is we don't actually need the list item. So I'm going to do this slightly differently. Let's change this, right? So div, we're going to set that inner HTML, and then I'm actually going to append the first element child instead. So just to clarify, I'm creating a div, I'm injecting that list item into it, and then I'm grabbing that and appending it into the to-do element. I just noticed a couple little quirks here that were not 100% right. And if we scroll down just a little bit, so handling submit events. So we're going to get the event, we're going to stop the form from reloading the page, and we're going to get the form data. And then I'm going to get each of the different pieces I care about. So the label, the due date, if there is one, and whether or not the important checkbox is checked. If there's no to-do item, we're going to bail. There's nothing to do. Otherwise, we're going to create an object with all of that data, and we're also going to use the crypto random UUID method to generate a random string as a unique identifier for that to-do. And then we're going to push all of that into our to-dos array, and then we can add a new to-do to the array, or to the UI rather, and passing in our object. And then I'm also going to clear the form. So that covers one aspect of it, right? I've got my form add event listener, listening for submit events, and I'm also rendering that to-do list initially. Now we also need to handle checks. So when the to-do list gets checked, we're going to listen for click events to handle that. Inside our click handler, we're going to get the button and get its UID. If there isn't one, we're going to return early. That means a button wasn't clicked. Somewhere else in there was clicked. Next, we're going to get the index of that to-do item using the array find index method. So for each to-do item, we're going to check if its UID matches the UID on the button. If there is no index, if it's less than 0, we can bail early. That means the item doesn't exist in our to-dos array anymore. It's another problem for another day. Assuming we found one, we're going to reverse the state. So if it's completed, we're going to set it to false. If it's not completed, we're going to set it to true. And then we can update our UI. So we'll change the button from, we'll give its ARIA pressed attribute to the new value of our to-do completed property. And we'll also update the button image itself. So the SVG inside that button to either show completed or not. So that's a lot of talking. Let's actually look at this thing. So we've got our form. We're going to, let's say, buy apples. That is due today, and it's important. Now, I have a place where I have something that should not. So let's see, HTML. Oh, yeah, I didn't reload the page. There we go. Cool. Let's try that again. Buy apples. That's due today. It's important. There we go. Okay. Now we're in business. Cool. Buy apples. Go to the gym. This one's important, but it has no to do. And let's say go snorkeling with dolphins. I have an appointment for that. That's on Saturday. And let's add one that just has none of the above, right? So eat potatoes. I don't know why you'd want to do that just on a to-do list, but we've got it here. So now we've got our items. And if I were to mark this as complete, you can see the box is checked off. If I were to inspect it, it has an ARIA pressed value of true. If I uncheck it, it reverses. The other thing we didn't do here is we didn't set it to delete, and we should probably do that. But I don't even feel like getting into that right now, so we'll do that another day. Let's take a look at how we would do this in Preact instead, or state-based UI, just generally. So same HTML, I've got my form, I've got my empty element, and I'm again importing the HTML render method and signal from Preact. And I've again got my to-dos array. Just like with the shopping cart, we're passing it into a signal. And here's where things get a little bit different. So inside, sorry, I hit a key and it just jumped me all the way up to the top of the page. So we have a to-do list component. And in there, we are saying if there's no to-dos, show the message. If there are to-dos, we're going to loop through each one and create a list item. Now, one of the nice things about doing this with state-based UI is I don't need to have multiple places to manage all this. I've just got the one place, and it renders it from that same place every time, diffing the DOM, figuring out what needs to change. So I'm going to create my unordered list, generate a list item with all of my different properties here. I am using an on-click method directly on the button. Now, I don't love this pattern, but it's very common in state-based UI. So we're going to do it here. And what I'm doing is I'm updating the completed state. So I've got this update to-do method that we'll take a look at in a second. I pass in the UID for this to-do and the opposite of its current completed state. So if it's already completed, I'll pass in false. If it's not completed, I'll pass in true. We'll see where that's relevant in a minute. If it's completed, we show one icon. If it's not, we show another. I've got my label. It's all the same stuff, right? If it's due, we show the due date. If it's important, we show the important message. The big difference here is instead of an empty string, I'm using null if those things don't exist. You could use an empty string. That'll kind of get converted into a falsy value under the hood, but explicitly saying null is a lot more common in tools like this. Let's take a look at update to do. I'm going to jump around a little bit. So the update to do function, we're getting the UID and the completed value, and we are cloning our to-dos. We're looking for the index of the item with that UID, just like before. We are setting the completed value to the new value, right? So we're reversing it. And then we're updating our state. And this right here will trigger this whole function to run again, only changing the things that need changing. So we don't need to selectively target that stuff. It just figures it out. Similarly, when the form is submitted, we are doing almost all the same stuff. The big difference is we are setting our to-dos value to a new array that contains all of the existing items plus the new one. And that is the trick that causes, again, all of the rendering to happen. And finally, we are getting our to-do element and form. We are rendering the to-do list into the to-do element and listening for submit events on the form. Let's take a look how this one works. So let's see here, right? So we're gonna buy apples. We're gonna do that today. It's important. I forget what all of my things are, so I'm just gonna copy them. Go to the gym. It's important. We are Snorkeling with dolphins. I do remember that one. Strangely, this one isn't important, despite seeming like it would be. And eat potatoes. Just adding that. So these all show up. If I check it off, it gets checked off. One other thing I just want to show you, this makes so much easier, right? Is I can do things like if, not even if, I'm sorry. So if completed, we're going to say HTML, delete, and then we'll do the same thing on the other side, right? And if not, we're doing nothing. And with that one little change, I can handle the whole check it off thing real easy. Ooh, I have an error. Something's not happening. cpush is not a function. Interesting. What did I do wrong? All right, we're going to remove what we just did. Did I find a bug in my own code while recording a video? It is entirely possible. Let's try this again. Go to the gym. Okay, no, so that works. So it was something with me adding deleted. It did not like that. Let's do this, I guess. Let's break it up onto its own. Oh, that might have had something to do with it. The lack of, did I not actually have that val in there? Let's see. Go to the gym. No, that's really weird. Why? Okay, let's try this a little bit differently, actually. So we're going to go like this, right? So we will say, is it, it could potentially be, one thing I'm considering is it might have to do with the changing number of elements. I think these tools sometimes get mad when you change the number of elements. No, there we go. That works now. So it's just the structure that I had there. I was trying to generate an element without its closing tag. That's right. That's the gotcha. Every element needs to have a closing tag in tools like that. That's one of the big things that bites me in the ass all the time. Cool. So now we've got our functional code here that does all the same things. So for something like the e-commerce platform, I generally wouldn't actually grab state-based UI. I think it's a use case where it can make sense. I wouldn't be mad about someone using it for that purpose. I personally prefer to use traditional vanilla JavaScript for that anyways, but I think there's arguments for why you could. But when you get into something like this to-do list with all of the moving parts, I think state-based UI starts to make a lot of sense. Real quick before you jump, also, I recently decided to stop selling expensive courses that most folks can only afford with a corporate training budget and focus on creating more excellent free content, including YouTube videos like this one. A recurring Go Make Things membership helps me create more videos like this and also get you some cool perks like access to my private Discord community and my personal collection of courses, guides, and code snippets. There are a range of membership levels available, and they all get the same perks. Even $3 a month helps keep this channel going. If that sounds interesting, you can join or learn more over at gomakethings.com/join, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.